good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Adrian Divecha, and joining us is the co-founder and COO of Whisper Aero, Ian Villa. Ian, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I thought we could jump in at the beginning, all the way at the start, and give a little insight into what led you towards aerospace in particular.
Great. So I've always been fascinated by really hard problems. And I think I've always had this natural inclination towards math and science. Eventually, that kind of took me into aerospace. I remember when I was 5, I really wanted to be an astronaut. And that idea of being able to soar through the skies, be able to explore space, all of that felt really exciting. And then one day, my parents had to take me to the optometrist's office, and I realized that my vision was really poor. Those games that they usually have on the table at the optometrist's office, maybe they don't have these today, but I remember this distinctly, where they had these wires, and on the wires were these blocks, and your goal is to string these blocks all the way to the end of the wire. I was really good at getting the blocks to the other end, but when the optometrist walked out and saw me with the block right next to my eye following the path, it was pretty clear that my vision was not going to improve, and it was very poor to begin with. Any kind of pilot, certainly astronauts, they've got to have great vision, and that wasn't going to be me. And so instead of being that sort of sporty test pilot, good enough to be an astronaut, decided to be an engineer instead.
Looking at your background, you're educated at Stanford, did your bachelor's and master's in aeronautics and astronautics then?
Yeah, again, very science-minded. So in high school, middle school, high school, I was a part of First Robotics. That was very formative in terms of how I think about the world and how I solve problems. It also taught me a lot about how you team build and how you actually accomplish big tasks. And so coming out of high school, I knew I really wanted to continue tackling those harder challenges, but I needed to be a bit smarter and a bit more educated and have the tools behind me under my belt in order to tackle those larger, bolder challenges. Was lucky enough to make it into Stanford, did my BS, MS there as part of the co-term program. I didn't have a whole lot of money just going into Stanford, but luckily I had scholarships. My parents also supported me, and I worked at research labs there, which also brought some really great experience. And taking the lean approach early on, decided to take tons of courses and complete the degree in 4 years. That was exciting. And then from there, I ended up going straight to industry. I knew I wanted to design airplanes after my time at Stanford. And so the question for me in 2014 was, do I stay at Stanford, get a PhD, and then design airplanes? Or do I go straight to industry and nab a job at one of these really awesome design groups? And obviously going and getting that job at a design group, that's the goal. That's the more direct path, but it wasn't clear if that was necessarily going to be possible. It just turned out around 2014, there was a big wave. I think you had a lot of the old guard at these aerospace companies starting to retire. And there was openings for fresh talent coming into Lockheed Skunk Works, in Northrop Grumman Advanced Design. And so coming out of Stanford, it really came down to, do I want to pursue the PhD, or do I want to actually join Northrop Grumman's Advanced Design Group in Southern California? Or do I want to join Lockheed Martin Skunk Works in Palmdale? Each of those two groups, really great, have made pretty awesome and spectacular achievements in flight. And I was lucky enough and ended up choosing Northrop Grumman Advanced Design, where I was able to really gather a lot of really great skills, learn from the best, take a lot of the theory and lessons learned at Stanford, but apply them in relevant ways towards real programs. And a few of those, I don't know how much I can say, but there's a lot of really cool aircraft I got to work on with a really talented set of designers across the board. Things that were subsonic all the way up to supersonic, manned and unmanned, which is really cool. And then just real legends. Like when you think about B2, tons of people in the advanced design org at Northrop Grumman made huge innovations and contributions to B2. If you've ever studied the history of stealth aircraft. And you've heard about things like Tacit Blue. A lot of folks that were on the Tacit Blue program, some really interesting looking aircraft. Just have learned a whole lot from those folks.
You've been a hard worker from day one. I think your background shows that, and your career path starting from Northrop Grumman and then getting the chance to be one of the original members of the Uber Elevate team, which was the forebearer in advanced air mobility, wrote the initial white paper for the industry. And you had a chance to be on that team. But reflecting back on your tenure at Uber Elevate, could you highlight or share any of the experiences that fundamentally shaped your approach moving forward?
Yeah. So Uber Elevate was really cool. That was Uber's aviation division, all focused on how do we fast forward to this future of ride sharing in the sky, but also drone delivery and really anything that needs to fly on the Uber platform. My co-founder at Whisper, Mark is like the godfather of Uber Elevate, but more importantly, just electric aviation and electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. In fact, he was the one who came up with that acronym. In 2016, Uber published the Elevate white paper, which really captivated the industry. And over the course of our time there, we were able to drive billions of dollars of investment into this brand new product category and get to some real tangible results, both in terms of the electric aircraft that are flying today, the kinds of ride sharing services and the multimodal connections involved that exist on the Uber app, to even the first beyond visual line of sight drone deliveries for McDonald's. We were able to literally deliver chicken McNuggets in San Diego on the Uber platform, which is really exciting. For me, my into Uber Elevate, it just so happened that they were starting to spool this division up. And I sent a cold email into the ether to, I think it was elevate@uber.com. And that made its way directly to the chief product officer at the time, Jeff Holden. Jeff's an awesome guy. He speaks extremely fast, and he tells people you have to literally listen faster. So after he received that, showed it to Mark and Nikhil and some of the other folks in the Elevate team, he scheduled time to meet for about 45 minutes on a Thursday in August of 2017. Met the team, went through a jam session, and that my first day at Uber, I think, was also the first day of the current CEO, Dara, at Uber HQ. And that was the starting point. And so I ended up being employee number 7 on Elevate, but we grew that to over 100 people. I think by the end of it, if you include everyone that was on the Uber side at all parts of the business, we were closer to 150-ish people. And I went from employee 7, just an engineer, to head of strategy in our system simulation efforts, helping to define what the future of aviation for Uber would look like.
Nice. Eventually, Uber Elevate ended up being bought by one of the large players today that continues their work from there. The largest player today that's continued the work there. But are there any lessons that have shaped your approach to Whisper Aero, or that drove you to co-founding Whisper?
Yeah, there's a lot. Whisper doesn't aspire to be Joby. It also doesn't aspire to be Uber Elevate. I think in life and in your career, you're constantly learning, responding, adjusting, evolving. And that's what Whisper is. At Uber Elevate, we had a thesis for how the future of aviation would look like. And in a very pragmatic, first principles driven way, we built out what we thought made sense for the future of aerial ride sharing, the future of drone delivery, and again, everything that had to fly on the Uber platform, whether that was Uber copters or even regional jets. We put together plans and strategies and enacted real efforts, putting real product and real flight tests out there into the world. But we were learning along the way, and we realized we were starting to actually put all the puzzle pieces together and come up with the first holistic views, go-to-market plays for UAM, urban air mobility, as well as a bunch of these other services. And we're starting to see the importance of noise. It's intuitive if you think about it. Just forget the complexity of air taxis and ride sharing. When you think about introducing flight into your everyday life. Most people think about airplanes at an airport, larger airplanes. And no duh, airplanes make noise. You can hear it when a Southwest 737 flies overhead, especially if you're close to an airport. And so intuitively, noise matters. But what nobody had done before Uber Elevate existed is quantify just how quiet you need to be to get to affordable flights every day. And you have to really think about that. Like me flying from Nashville to Atlanta or Nashville to Dallas Fort Worth, that's not a flight I make every day. And it's certainly not at a price point where I can say, okay, I want to go to Atlanta today, or I want to go to Dallas Fort Worth today. Let me just bring up my Uber app and fly there. We're not there yet. And so when you look at all of these pieces, the technology play, the operations piece, the infrastructure, nobody had figured out a way to combine all those elements and understand just how quiet these aircraft needed to be to operate at scale. And what Uber did differently than anyone else, and I think this is something that still has not been completed by any other players at the same sort of level of rigor that we had completed at Elevate, outside of Joby, of course, because they acquired Elevate, is building a system simulation framework that allows us to really holistically think about this challenge. While at Elevate, as the head of strategy and system simulation, I had the pleasure of working and leading about a fifth of the team. This was data scientists, product analysts, engineers who were taking these billions of Uber trips, billions of non-Uber trip data, and then combining that with aircraft performance models, infrastructural models, operational models, weather models that were based on real data we were pulling from METAR databases, noise data we were pulling from noise measurements that we conducted in Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Diego, and a few other places, and economics models and demand models holistically, all in one, multi-fidelity, which then allowed us to really simulate what the world could look like in multiple different locales: LA, Dallas, Miami, Japan, Seoul. Really look at what the future of aviation could look like. And when we brought the real data together, these real trips, performance data on these aircraft, infrastructure estimates, and then operational assumptions based on real Uber copter trips we were flying in New York, the thing we found is that to make this a product at scale that is affordable for everyone, you have to be flying every single minute of every single hour of every single day. And you only get there if you're quiet enough to map into the conforming land use. That's the first piece. But let's say hypothetically you are quiet enough to map into that conforming land use. You still want to be responsible to your communities. You don't want a community of people that are experiencing these flights every single day. And maybe you are quiet, but you're still not that quiet and not affordable, to start thinking like, hey, okay, this is really intrusive to my daily life and it doesn't really do me any good, any benefit. So why should I support it? So that, looking at high quality data combined in a really well-formed thought framework, and then projecting that out into multiple locales, that gave us what was the starting position for Whisper, which is that we needed a quieter propulsion system for drones, for air taxis, for jets, really the future of flight. Because if you're not quieter, you won't be able to achieve scale. And that was another aha moment in my career. And talking through this with Mark and looking back at the history of aviation, you see this. You realize that every big step change in flight really is preceded by a step change in propulsion. So that's what Whisper really is. Whisper is this next generation propulsion company that is opening the doors to a new world of possibilities, whether that's drone delivery, drones really for all use cases, agricultural, delivery, cargo, DoD defense, to these larger aircraft that'll move people and things every single day.
And I know you have a strong vision and a clear vision for where the company's going. Can you explain to the listeners how Whisper Aero plans to impact the broader transportation ecosystem?
Yeah. So again, the core of Whisper is we're a next generation propulsion company delivering cleaner, quieter, more efficient thrust for drones, for aircraft, and more. And the cool thing that we've done is we've developed this propulsion system that scales. It can be small and compact for tiny aircraft. It can be large to propel, 100-seat regional jetliners in the future. But when you move air cleaner, quieter, and more efficiently in a package that can scale, really the window of opportunity or the kinds of opportunities that are available to you is anything that moves air. And our benefit to society is not just being able to provide transportation solutions that are affordable and flying every day, but it's transforming the way we think about harnessing the power of air, whether that's through leaf blowers or stovetop fans or carbon capture. There's just so many opportunities to leverage and harness the power of air in a more efficient and cleaner and quieter form factor that we have this huge opportunity to go tackle, and excites me and excites the rest of the team every single day.
I want to dive a little bit more into the scaling or solving noise at scale. And you touched on moving air being key, but how has the quiet propulsion integrated into your product development strategy?
Yeah, so we think about noise on day one. That's not the case for most developers, whether you're an airframer or a propulsion provider. For a long time, if you look at how these groups are organized, how they structure their teams to go solve these challenges, usually you have a conceptual design group with someone who can draw up the airplane, an aerodynamicist, some people that look at structures and performance. But the acoustics person usually is relegated to after the aircraft is locked in. And the challenge with that is when your acoustics guy, whose sole job is to make sure that your airplane is as quiet as possible, has little to no bearing on the major elements that actually drive the noise, you will never have an aircraft or a propulsion system that is as quiet as it truly could be. Your acoustics person is really just applying acoustic band-aids to your design. They may say, hey, you may want to shift your wing a little bit. You may want to move your engine slightly, but they'll never be able to, at day one of the process, be able to say, okay, here's how you should be thinking about noise, and still treating noise as a true objective that's as important as hitting your range and hitting your speed. And so when we started Whisper, we turned that on its head. We said, first off, acoustics is going to be one of the very first things that we evaluate in our designs, day one. And then when we think about reducing acoustics, like reducing the noise of our propulsion systems, it's all about not just trying to treat or apply band-aids, but thinking through the first principles. Where are the sources of noise actually being generated? How do we minimize all of those sources of noise? And then taking a very human perspective on this, right? Like our ears are tuned to listen from 20 to 20,000 hertz when we're born. How do you take that knowledge of how humans hear and apply that in a way that actually takes this minimized noise profile and then tailors it so now you've got a much more pleasant sound, if you can even hear it, in your daily life? That's been our high level approach. And it turns out when you do that, you end up with a much better solution. I like to tell some folks, like, noise is energy. If you are able to minimize that noise, then obviously you're saving on all that wasted energy, which allows you to end up with higher efficiencies that you can apply towards getting better range or better speed or both, or maybe some other kind of advantages that matter to your particular use case.
And I'm sure developing the ultra quiet technology has come with its own, I want to say, set of hurdles or challenges. Were there any major hurdles in development that made you rethink the strategy?
Great question. So the first thing is, I would say we're the only people out there that are truly ultra quiet. When we came out the gate and said we were working on ultra quiet propulsion, there weren't really many people using ultra quiet as a term. And I've started to see people use the term, but I think today we're gonna make clear that ultra quiet is whisper. And the reason why is ultra quiet is short for ultrasonically quiet. We take some of these tones, and this was the thesis at the very beginning of Whisper. Our thought was we could take the tones that you typically hear out of a fan, out of any sort of rotating component, take that blade passage frequency and push it up into the ultrasonic. That was one of our tricks. The second piece was we would achieve the ultrasonic by not rotating at a crazy high RPM, but actually have a much higher blade count. Run that high blade count at a reasonably high RPM that the electric motors want to be at, but also at the right speeds that keep your tip speed low. So that was the going in thesis for Whisper. Okay, we're going to be ultra quiet. We're going to be ultra quiet through the use of this high blade count fan that spins electric motors at significantly high RPMs, but not so high that the fan itself is operating at a really high tip speed. And the good news is that it's easier said than done. We were able to achieve this in our first 9 months at Whisper, which is honestly quite impressive. The hardest challenge was in the production and innovation of those blades. We have patented technology around how you actually are able to manufacture and build and design these. And we're continuing to refine and patent against those innovations around the core of that high blade count piece of that. So that was where our most significant challenges were. Even for the first few months, the year of Whisper, it was an unknown if we would ever be able to manufacture some of these concepts that on paper look like they would work out. But through a lot of trial and error and some really clever engineering, we were able to make all of this real and then eventually built and then fly it. We've been flying the tech for a while now. We've tested the tech to significantly high Mach. I won't say exactly how high, but pretty high speed.
That's pretty cool. It's definitely been an impressive run. And when you say 9 months, I just want to add a little bit of context that Whisper started in 2020, if I'm correct. Did it not?
We got things started in 2021. Like we locked the seed round February of 2021. That's when we actually started building stuff.
So the 9 months that took you to be able to build that, I just want to remind the audience that a lot of the world was on lockdown. It wasn't easy to get all the materials or resources you needed. And any type of R&D that can stay on schedule or ahead of schedule during that time was probably part of a very good team that was extremely organized, had a great idea and vision, and knew where they were going. But yeah, I just want to highlight the 9 months there, because 9 months is like, oh, okay. But then you realize when it was, and you're like, oh, wow, that team did something that, not many would have been able to do in the same situation. Extremely
I
impressive
appreciate
how you
that.
managed.
Honestly, sometimes I think we here at Whisper forget what our pace is relative to everything else. You're totally right that in the pandemic, things slowed to a crawl. Like literally there were job shops that wouldn't open. There were job shops that would be open and then somebody would contract COVID and then the entire shop is just shut down. We were lucky enough that Mark purchased this resort, a 20-acre resort in the middle of Crossville, Tennessee, just smack dab in the middle of Tennessee. It's 100 miles away from Nashville Airport. It's another sort of hour and a half away to Knoxville, which is the other big airport in the state. And so that provided this proving ground, this innovation campus for us to make those fast routes. Not only did we have this killer team, but that starting lineup of players coming from Northrop and Lockheed and NASA, this starting lineup of some really awesome technical folks, they all came and bought in and moved into Mark's campus. And that's where we were able to really innovate, live, work, play in the same area and make the kinds of nimble technology advancements that we did. We still move fast, don't get me wrong, but I think not having that campus and being co-located and living, working, and playing together every single day, it would have been really challenging.
Yeah, it definitely helps with the free flow of ideas. And again, trusting the information that's coming to you. I'm sure having that trust in a team because you're close helps the innovation when you're going through that period. No, that's pretty
100%.
cool. And the future seems to be more and more electric, or we're looking at sustainable options. But how do you see the electric propulsion technology evolving? And do you feel that Whisper Aero will play an even larger role in this transformation moving forward?
Yeah, appreciate it. So I think you're right. Like a lot of the bigger, well-capitalized players today, they're still in this sort of Gen 1 phase. For the last decade and a half, the industry was just trying to prove that, hey, you can actually electrify these aircraft and make them fly. And only recently have we started to see some of these aircraft actually fly, certify, and then take flight, like the Pipistrel Velis Electro. That's one example of one of these first certified electric aircraft that are flying today. And now, as we move along, there's more intricate, more complex, and more challenging aircraft that have made its way through all the way to flight tests, like the Joby S4 and Archer's Midnight, which are continuing to show the capabilities of electric and what it can do for us. But if we fast forward to 2050 and think about what really matters, those first few moments, those first flights proving out the tech, those certainly matter. But the things that will impact everybody's daily life is how we achieve scale, right? Like when you fly a Southwest, the 737, the reason why that's accessible and something that we can even generally think about booking is the fact that they have, over many decades, made commercial transportation something that's scalable and accessible to many. And so when we think about electric flight, like what's going to take us there, that's what Whisper's starting to think about. It's not how do we just get things off the ground. It's not how do we just launch services. It's how can we enable the next suite, the next generation of flight that will make the skies more accessible and affordable to the many. Electric is a piece of that, right? Um, Electric motors are really high efficiency at multiple RPMs. And so naturally, our electric engines, they are driven by electric motors. But I think for the next decade and a half, you're still going to see aircraft that, even if they have electric propulsion on it, may still be powered or be leveraging in some part JP fuel, turbo generators, some of the SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. The industry as a whole is headed towards a net zero emissions target by 2050. And at Whisper, we're thinking really critically about that now. How can we, in the next 26 years, ensure that we're developing tech that allows us to be zero emissions in the sky and much more responsible? Because we've only got one planet. It's going to be really tough to fix it if it's past the point where you can't control everything. And so today, not only are we developing solutions that we can field and commercialize to the DoD as well as to consumers, we're thinking about how do we scale the tech up in size and thrust in order to propel larger 100-seat jetliner aircraft and really all sorts of aircraft that need to be in the air, providing services to our daily life, whether that's cargo movement, passenger movement. There's probably a myriad of other services we don't even think about today that are going to be commonplace once flight is cheaper and more readily accessible.
Yeah, that's true. The Wright brothers, I'm sure their first thought wasn't passenger transport when they were building their first aircraft. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of use cases show up as the technology evolves. And I'm glad you touched on the strategic positioning or influences that can help the industry develop, because this R&D takes a lot of capital. It's not cheap. And so there are other kind of industries that can help influence it. And you had mentioned the defense sector. And with your ultra quiet tech, how has the defense sector's response to your technology helped the strategic positioning of Whisper?
Definitely. And full disclosure, I have to be careful about some of the things I say. Is there a need for quiet propulsion by the Department of Defense? Absolutely. You can read things that The Air Force, the Office of the Undersecretary for Defense, has published, there's these long-term strategic roadmaps that say, yeah, noise matters. But more important than noise, it's like, how can you provide ways that are cleaner, quieter, and more efficient? As we continue to progress and we see the energy challenges that are looming, those energy challenges are not limited to just you and me in our daily lives. The reality is that it impacts us all, defense included. More recently, we're finding, yes, noise matters, but the energy piece, being more efficient, being able to do more with what you've got, that matters a whole lot too. And when we provide these propulsion solutions, these capability unlocks, it's not just about can you be quiet, but it's about can you be quiet and achieve longer range and get to higher speeds and be able to fly lower to the ground as examples. So having real conversations with users, with technology developers at DARPA and the Air Force and all these other places, they've really helped guide our thinking in this process and ensure that we're not just stovepiped thinking singularly about noise, but actually we're thinking holistically about what users really need. And that's what the DoD wants. We see that validation in the fact that we've already received 6 contracts, been awarded and actually completed 6 contracts with the Air Force and other parts of the DoD so far. We're continuing that work. There's more contracts in the pipeline, nothing I can talk about just yet, but there's some serious work going on right now. And we're on a path to commercializing one of our larger thrusters for a big DoD player later this year. So that's super, super exciting.
That's cool. That's cool. It's always great to see that you have that proof of concept and then people believe in it, they keep going. And yeah, the DoD is one of the country's biggest customers. They drive innovation and they're really at the heart of innovation. DoD,
totally. You look at flight,
time,
right? Flight, the Department of Defense has always played a really large role in flight, whether that was supersonics, right? The first jet aircraft, to the advent of stealth. And you see this in the Nighthawk. And electric's really interesting in that this is one of those rare periods where in some ways industry is outpacing the DoD. There has been this unusual, over the course of the last 100 years, unusual infusion of capital from VCs that didn't exist in the Wright brother era. And this has been a good thing. And a Joby or an Archer wouldn't necessarily exist in a climate that didn't have venture capital, and venture capital that was so willing to make big, bold bets on what the future looks like. So that's been really exciting. On the opposite side of the spectrum, okay, now DoD is not necessarily the leader or at least driving the spend towards a Joby or an Archer from its earliest days. And so I think you're going to see this regression or this correction where now the next players that are starting to arise, they're much more mindful about the DoD as a customer first, right? When Joby was building the S4, I wouldn't say that the DoD, like Agility Prime didn't exist. The Air Force didn't even know really how to think fully through electric vertical takeoff and landing flight. They knew they needed vertical takeoff and landing. They knew they needed quiet. It wasn't clear that eVTOL was necessarily that answer. And I think there's still probably gaps in what they desire versus what industry is building today. So this next wave of players, they're going to, what makes them different is now they're equipped with all the learnings and understandings. Oh, that's kind of cool. The learnings and understandings of electric that's come to pass over the last decade, combined with a real user understanding and a real openness by the DoD community to accept innovation that may not necessarily have started at the DoD level. And so the same way there's a Gen 1 eVTOL and this like Gen 2, how do we get to quiet? How do we get to scale? I think there's going to be this Gen 2 need by the DoD that's going to realize there's these new pockets of innovation that exist throughout, and they're going to start tapping into those. You're starting to see bits and pieces of it here and there, whether it's competitions like the FTUAS competition with the Army, whether it's Agility Prime and AFWorks and some of these more innovation groups, Defense Innovation Unit, DIU. But I think those threads, that drumbeat, they're going to start drumming harder, and you're going to see more purpose-built solutions for DoD first, and then commercial will follow as opposed to the opposite.
It's all an evolution. But moving on from the technical and strategic perspectives, I want to discuss a little bit about the human element at Whisper. And you'd mentioned a little bit earlier on about the camaraderie and the teamwork early on. How would you describe the culture at Whisper?
Yeah, so I would say the culture is really solid here. Innovation's in our DNA, and it really starts with your values. So as much as Mark and I knew the future had to be quiet and there are all these things we wanted to go build, when we were writing the business plan, the first three things we did was we wrote the mission, the vision, and then the third piece was, what are our values? Because no matter, whatever you do in a startup, even as your product evolves, even as the course of your technical development winds, what you can still stick to are those values. And it doesn't matter what your role in the company is, whether you were an aerospace engineer, an aeronautics engineer, whether you're a technician, whether you're an ops member, it doesn't matter what you're doing. These values hold true across the board and provides a common base for people to understand each other and then to problem solve in a way that actually matters. At Whisper, we take this super, super seriously. You can look at our values. They're on our website. They're a core part of our recruiting process. And then even after you've come on board as a team member, we reinforce these values every week by highlighting examples across the team. The various sub-teams all highlight examples of things that they encountered in their day-to-day. And that allows us to really, as a team, think critically. Are we sticking to these values? Are the things that we're doing, are we using these values in the right way? Are they reinforcing how we do better work? And at their core, I think the values are solid. So there's, I think, 14 of them. Everything from think end to end, foster creative genius, embody safety, aim to win, be an owner, do more with less, ruthlessly prioritize. All of these values just matter so much to us. We've got them plastered on our wall. And I think unless you have a culture and these principles that you can guide the work, especially as your team scales, it becomes harder and harder to ensure that everybody's on the same page. So that's like really core to us. It was especially helpful when we were all living, working, playing together in the same location. It helps frame the kinds of tough decisions that you have to make and wrangle with on a day-to-day basis. And then when we think about recruiting new talent, these all become lenses that allow us to find team members we're comfortable with, and we know we'll continue to raise the bar as we grow.
It is important to find the right team members. There's a saying that even if it's an A+ person, but they don't match the culture, that it's not worth it. It's discussion for another time. But transitioning a little forward here, because I know people are interested in hearing what's to come with Whisper, and you're poised at the brink of several breakthroughs. Are you able to outline some of the exciting milestones or share a little sneak peek into what we can expect over the coming months or coming year?
Yeah. I think one thing that's really exciting is, as a hardware company, we just completed our third year anniversary. So now we're on year 4. On year 4, we're going to be generating sales-based revenue. And that's pretty significant. You look at these other electric aviation players, many still have not generated sales-based revenue. There's a lot of people making some big, bold bets, and I applaud them for that. And they've made some really awesome progress with a lot of venture dollars backing them. That's awesome. And that's a really great stage for Whisper to succeed. What we've been able to do is build a technology and fit it with needs that exist today and find this kind of crawl, walk, run approach to generating that revenue, validating user needs, and then using that as a new basis to build our next set of products. So rather than be fully vertically integrated, we have this opportunity to build a core tech and then apply that horizontally across things like DoD propulsion systems, leaf blowers, and then a few other products. And not ready to say exactly what products 3, 4, 5 are going to be just yet. But product 1, like I said earlier, is going to be that first DoD thruster. Product number 2 is going to be a leaf blower. We're partnering with a pretty large player to get Whisper quiet leaf blowers around the globe. And it's pretty transformative. It is not just quieter. We've shown that you can get so quiet, you can operate these leaf blowers at night, but also blow 40% more air than professional leaf blowers and do that with 40% less power. So effectively, you move more air, you operate at night and don't annoy anybody, and you're using less energy. You can run this longer, but you probably won't have to anyways because you're now moving more air. You're just in general more responsible to the environment. You're doing more with less, which is really cool. And then 3, 4, and 5, again, we've got teams working on various different prototypes, everything from commercial plays on the ground to aviation commercial, as well as some new DoD plays. And we'll see what really pops. But I think similar to the way that we surprise people with the leaf blower, we may end up surprising folks once again. And we aim to surprise and delight. Going to be very excited once we're able to share more on those fronts.
Do you have any exclusive insights or announcements that you could share with our listeners today?
Yeah. So one thing that's exciting is, actually, I'll give you 2 things. How about that? So the first is we have been lucky enough to have received funding from the state to go build a flight test hangar 5 minutes away from our HQ in Crossville, Tennessee. And mid last year, we announced a groundbreaking. There's a photo of me online shoveling some dirt with the county and the city mayor and Speaker Sexton, who helped to push that initiative at the state level. But some time has passed. The hangar is now constructed, and we're finishing up the last of its reviews. And so in a few months, we're going to actually have an opening ceremony for that. So that's really cool. That's where we're going to be able to actually integrate some of our tech onto drones and be able to test some larger solutions. But the second thing that we'll mention that kind of goes with that is we're also considering having a supplier summit. So we haven't locked the date just yet, and we're trying to gauge the interest. But on the same day we ribbon cut for the flight test hangar, we're also thinking of holding a summit where we can bring in suppliers to come and see a little bit more about our product roadmap and where we may be headed and what sort of needs we may have from a manufacturing side of things. And we're big believers in building in America, but also building in Tennessee. If you're an American supplier and interested in figuring out how you can play into the future of Whisper, we should definitely chat and see if it makes sense for you to attend our supplier summit.
That is huge news. Congrats on both of those. And the supplier summit sounds like there's going to be a lot of new collaborations that are about to come together, which is very exciting to see.
Definitely. So, yeah. The goal is to build, test, and then hopefully flight test within just a few miles of each other in the heart of Tennessee.
I want to give you the chance to highlight why Tennessee is such a great state for your team. And why don't you highlight the benefits of living in Tennessee and some of the things you've enjoyed?
Yeah, Tennessee's awesome. Nobody's got a monopoly on innovation. And I think the cool thing about Tennessee is you have a business-friendly state with a lot of momentum driving into the futures of manufacturing as well as mobility and electric vehicles at large. You have Ford, GM, Nissan all investing in the state for the future of their electric vehicles. You have big names like LG Chem and major suppliers like Denso also located in the state, also ramping up their operations towards these future mobility needs. And so the cool thing that we've been able to do is lean into that and realize with the Tennessee economic and community development, as well as just the state at large, realize that it's not just about building in Tennessee. It's how can we design, build, manufacture, and then ship products in this state? And that design piece, that was missing. It's not enough just to have manufacturing here, but when you can create high-paying jobs to a place where people increasingly want to move to, like Nashville, 86 people are moving every single day into the city, that becomes a really awesome sort of proving ground for the future of mobility. In the last decade, we've thought a lot about, okay, innovation happening in Silicon Valley, in Los Angeles, and fintech in New York. I think there's other parts of the United States that are ready to innovate. And we're showing in Tennessee that the right elements are here. And when you have the right set of people that are enterprising and pushing for just step changes in our quality of life, you can actually do that in a place that is not only going to lean into your business, but has just a rich culture and really awesome access to nature, the environment, hiking trails. So I've had a really great time in Tennessee. I know our team has too. And we're going to continue to build here and expand because the state has been so great to us and so have the people.
Tennessee is a beautiful state. Tennessee has a great food scene. If you are a nightlife person, the nightlife's amazing. And the other great thing is that if you're an outdoor person, the outdoors are amazing over there. Tennessee literally has something for everyone. And it's much more affordable than other parts of the country. There's a lot of activity going on in that part of the country. I look forward to seeing the development because I know you're going to pull in some great minds and people are going to follow them to that area. It'll be very cool to see that development.
Definitely.
What would be your most rewarding experience today?
That's so tough. There's so many awesome experiences. I think every first is really exciting. First spin up of a fan. I remember being up till 5 a.m. Everything finally worked. And then we decided to go to Waffle House. And that was like the first and last time I went to Waffle House in the last few years. There was the first time we flew our drone with this ultra quiet propulsion system on it and realized we couldn't hear it from 200 feet overhead, 250 feet overhead. That was amazing. We had a demo day in 2022 when we were still in stealth mode, and we were able to show off all of the tech to our investors and some new folks and unveil the Whisper Jet for the first time in a private setting. And then a year later, we unveiled the Whisper Jet at Aviation last June to a much larger audience and much more positive reception. All of those firsts, super exciting. There's a few other firsts that we can't talk about just yet. But that's the really exciting thing about a startup that's fast moving and continuing to push. We aren't satisfied on sitting on our past achievements, but we're constantly trying to outdo ourselves. And just seeing the amount of progress we've made to date excites me more for the amount of progress we've yet to achieve, but I know is going to be on our sights if we continue with the same level of rigor and dedication that we have here every single day.
To really succeed in industry or a sector like this, passion is a driving force and loving what you do. You can tell that you love what you do. I'm excited for Whisper Aero because I think your potential is truly unlimited with the use cases that you have and the way that you're impacting not just air mobility, advanced air mobility, but the world with your technology is absolutely amazing and inspiring, and extremely excited to see what's on the horizon for Whisper Aero and your team.
Awesome. Thanks for having us and allowing us to tell our story to more folks.